Hi, I'm Daniel Gold, and welcome to the Gold Standard Leadership Lab. By day, I'm a partner at a leading advisory firm where I draw upon my background as an attorney to help my clients succeed. This podcast, though, is my personal project, completely separate and apart from my day job, but reflects the same passion that I exhibit everywhere for teaching, for mentoring, and helping others succeed through simple, impactful lessons. It is my hope that you'll walk away with practical takeaways to help you on your leadership journey. Thanks for being a part of this community and for joining me in the Leadership Lab. Let's get started. Years ago, I started a new job with a company that was about to change the legal services industry for good. And before I could consult on a single project, before I was allowed to talk to a single client, I was handed 2 books and told to read them before my first day. The first book was Eliyahu Goldratt's The Goal, and the second was Raving Fans. Nobody told me that these were optional. It was mandatory. And I was told that this was how the company worked, and that if I didn't understand the books, I wouldn't understand the job. I thought that was the whole onboarding, but I was wrong. It actually wasn't even the beginning. The company I joined had built one of the most respected managed services operations in a part of the legal industry most people outside of it have probably never heard of. The unglamorous hardware and software that sits behind every major litigation. The people that handle the data that nobody sees, but everyone depends upon because they're crucial. I came in as a solutions consultant, the person standing between what clients needed and what the company could actually deliver. And before they let me do that job, not only was I to read those books before day one, but when I got there, they made me sit in on every other job first. That's right, 10 weeks split across IT, the team that processed the data, project management, application development, the team that implemented the contracts once they were signed, and so on and so on. All of this before I was trusted to do the thing I was actually hired to do. And at the time, I was living in Charlotte, North Carolina. The company was based in a small town in Kansas. For the better part of a year, I flew back and forth every single week, Charlotte to Kansas and back, just to physically sit inside one of these teams long enough to understand how the work moved. And eventually, my family and I packed up and moved to Kansas because you can't fake your way through that kind of understanding from that kind of distance. And at the time, I thought this was just an unusually thorough onboarding. But now, I know better. What that company did to me before I even touched a client was teach me systems thinking as a lived discipline. Okay? Systems thinking. They understood something that most leaders never learn. You cannot find what's broken in a system you've only ever seen from one seat. That's what we're talking about today. Not motivation, not mindset, a discipline. How to see the system you're standing inside of and how to tell the difference between what feels broken and what's constraining you. And I want to be upfront about something before we go further. 40 episodes ago, that's right, 40 episodes ago, in episode 26, I asked the question, should you quit? That episode was a personal diagnostic test for you. We talked about mission, energy, impact, team, and gut. It was about accurately reading your own exhaustion. This episode, though, is not that. This episode asks a harder, earlier question. Before you ask whether you should quit, have you diagnosed what is broken? Because most leaders never get that far. Why? Because they feel the friction and then they react to it. They never find the real constraint. And today, I want to be able to fix that for you. I want to slow down now. Okay? I want to slow down here because most leadership content skips this part entirely. And that omission is exactly why most leaders never find the real constraint. A system, as we're calling it, is not just a bunch of stuff. A system has 3 parts, and only 3 parts according to Donella Meadows, who wrote the book Thinking in Systems. Those 3 parts are 1, elements, 2, interconnections, and 3, purpose. Elements are the parts you can see and touch. They are the people, they are the departments, they're the headcount, line items on an org chart. Interconnections are the rules and relationships between those elements, the things that determine how they behave toward one another. And purpose, that is the deepest layer of all, the thing the whole system is organized to produce. Now, the mistake that a lot of leaders make is automatically defaulting to managing elements. Why? Because they are the easiest part of a system to see. Because when something feels broken, our instinct is to change an element. For an example, let's fire the slow manager. Let's hire a new VP. Let's reorganize the entire segment, the team, the practice, the service line. But changing elements is usually the weakest lever you have. Danella Meadows, who spent her career studying how systems behave, makes this point about football. How? If you swap out every player on a football team, and you still have a football team, it might play better, it might play worse, but it's still recognizably football. Now, keep the same players, but change the rules from football to basketball. Same people, same field, entirely different game. That's the power of interconnections. They determine how elements behave toward each other, and changing them changes everything, even when the people stay exactly the same. Purpose is the one almost nobody touches because almost nobody can see it clearly. Purpose is not what's written in your mission statement. Purpose is deducted from behavior. You don't find a system's purpose by reading what it claims about itself. You find it by watching what it rewards and what it punishes. Now, way back in episode 7, I talked about systems, discipline, and the soul of leadership. And in that episode, I told a story about an employee who found a faster, smarter way to solve a client's problem using the software more efficiently. The work was done well. The client was extremely happy. The problem? That employee got chastised because they hadn't logged enough billable hours. And come review season, someone who moved more slowly and delivered less got the bigger bonus because they billed more time doing it. The element was the employee. The interconnection was a compensation rule that tied rewards to hours logged after than to value delivered. The purpose, the one revealed by what got rewarded, was never serve the client well. It was protect billable hours. It's ironic because the firm's mission statement likely mentioned client service. So the system's behavior said something entirely different. Now, that gap is where almost every leadership failure I've ever watched up close lives. So let's actually make this much more concrete for you. Here's a scenario that almost anyone in professional services will recognize immediately. Your team wants to bring in a new tool, a new process, a new way of doing the work that everyone on the ground agrees would make things faster and better. And it dies. Not because anyone said no outright, but because it had to clear 16 different layers of internal approval. And at every layer, someone finds a reason to slow it down or send it back. Legal wants more time to review it. Risk wants another round of questions answered. IT wants a security assessment that takes 3 months. Nobody says no. Everybody just adds friction. And the friction compounds and the initiative dies a very slow death. And everyone privately blames the last department to slow it down. Now, most leaders stop their analysis right there. Why? They found the loudest department and they assume that that must be the problem. Now, run it through the 3 layers instead. The elements are the functions involved: legal, risk, IT, and the business unit asking for the change. The interconnections are the unwritten rule running underneath it all. The rule nobody wrote down anywhere, which is that nobody in any of those functions wants to be the name attached to the bad outcome if something goes wrong later. So literally everyone defers. Everyone asks for one more review. Everyone protects themselves by slowing things down because slow is safe and fast is risky, and nobody gets fired for slow. And the purpose, deduced from behavior rather than from whatever the strategic plan says about innovation and growth, well, the system isn't organized to enable new ideas. It's organized to prevent the next bad outcome. That's not a flaw hiding somewhere in the process. That's the system working exactly as it was designed, just not designed for what leadership claims it's designed for. So I want to give you a tool now for finding this, because deduce purpose from behavior can sound like a nice phrase, and it's actually really hard to use. Back in episode 39, The Leadership Flywheel, I borrowed from the organizational psychologist Edgar Schein. Now, Schein distinguished what he called artifacts, the visible stuff, the mission statement on the lobby wall, and what he called basic underlying assumptions. These unwritten rules govern behavior. The artifacts are the paint. The assumptions are the foundation. If you don't manage the foundation, it manages you. And Schein gave us 3 places to look. What does the organization measure and control, not what it says it values? How did leadership react the last time something went wrong? Did the first question sound like, whose fault is this? Or what can we learn? And who got the last promotion because rewarding the wrong person is louder than any mission statement you will ever write? There's 2 completely different disciplines that land on the same conclusion here. Systems theory tells you purpose is revealed by behavior, not rhetoric. Now, organizational psychology tells you culture is revealed by what gets measured, what gets punished, and who gets promoted, not by what gets said in a town hall. When 2 different fields of study independently arrive at exactly the same answer, that's usually a sign you found something true. But now we get to the tricky part. Even if you've correctly identified that something is broken. So Eli Goldratt, in his book, The Goal, built his entire body of work, The Theory of Constraints, around one observation. What was it? Every system has exactly one constraint. The single weakest link that limits everything else. So for instance, a chain is only as strong as its weakest link. And strengthening any of the other links does nothing for the chain's overall strength. It can make things worse because you've added weight and cost to a part of the chain that was never the problem in the first place. Think about what that means for the 16-layer approval example that I just mentioned. The instinct, once leadership notices the friction, is usually to fix the loudest department. So for instance, send legal for more training, add headcount to risk. All of that strengthens a link that was never the weakest. The function that looks the most inefficient is very often actually not the one limiting what the whole system can produce. The constraint is usually quieter than the loudest complaint in the room. Goldratt built a discipline around finding and working a constraint correctly in a very strict order. That order looks like this. Identify it, so you get more out of what you already have before spending anything. Align everything else around it, and only then invest money to expand it. Almost every leader skips straight to spending because spending feels like leadership. It feels decisive. But the earlier steps, when done fully, typically expose a huge amount of hidden capacity that had been sitting there the entire time, completely free. The 16-layer approval process probably isn't underfunded. It's probably underused, full of capacity nobody's bothered to find because everyone's jumped straight to, we need more people, before they even ever asked, are we using what we have? So let's say that you found the constraint. You understand the system underneath it, the elements, the interconnections, and purpose. Now comes the question almost nobody asks, and it's the question the entire episode has been building toward. You ready? Do you have the authority to move it? Right? Do you have the authority to move it? Not whether you should try, not whether you care enough. whether you, in the seat you currently sit in, have the power to change the layer where the constraint actually lives. This is where I need to draw a distinction that most leadership conversations blur together between authority and influence. You can call it power if you want to call it power, because they are not the same thing, and confusing them costs people years of their career. Authority is structural by its nature, right? It's the right to move an interconnection or a purpose. It usually comes with a title, control over the budget, the power to hire and fire, and a seat on the board. Now, influence is relational. People listen to you. They defer to your judgment. They change their behavior because you ask them to, even though you hold no formal lever that requires them to. Influence is real and it matters, but it's not a stable, permanent state the way authority is. It's closer to a balance. You're spending down every time you use it. Every time you name a constraint and nothing moves, you haven't just failed to fix the problem. You've spent some of the trust people had in you reading the situation. And if you do that enough times, and the deference that used to follow your judgment stops following it. I have watched this happen to people more than once, many, many times, in more than one organization. Someone takes a senior seat with real influence and no authority over the layer where the constraint actually sits. And for a while, that influence is enough to move small things. But every time the bigger constraint gets named and nothing happens, a little more of that influence erodes. And what I've noticed, watching this pattern repeat itself, is that it's rarely about the person at all. When you see two different people in succession sitting in the same seat, independently arriving at the same complaint, that's not two leaders who weren't good enough. That's a seat that was built by design or by neglect to have influence and nothing else. The problem is never the person. It was the chair. There's this old idea, the one about two roads diverging in a yellow wood, that gets quoted at moments exactly like this one, and usually to romanticize the uncertainty of the choice. I don't think that's useful here. The poem is about not knowing where either road leads. And this diagnostic that we're talking about in today's episode exists specifically to remove that not knowing. You can find out before you commit to anything whether you hold real authority over the constraint you've identified. And so here's the test that I have for you. Once you have found your constraint, your elements, your interconnections, purpose, all of it diagnosed, ask yourself one question. Do I have authority over the layer where the constraint lives, or do I only hold influence? There are only two answers, and each one tells you which sequence of work comes next. Okay? If you have authority, the sequence is resilience first. You hold your center long enough to work the constraint correctly before you spend a dollar expanding it, because most leaders with authority still skip straight to spending. Then empowerment, because moving an interconnection or a purpose almost never happens through your effort alone. It requires other people across functions you don't fully control choosing to act differently because you've made the case clearly enough. What comes out the other side, if you've done the work, is reinvention. Not your own personal reinvention. The system itself now operates differently because you use real authority correctly. So if you don't have authority, only influence that's been depreciating every time you've named the problem and watched nothing change, the sequence runs differently. The reinvention doesn't happen when you leave. It happens the moment you admit the diagnosis. That tenure, that loyalty, that political capital, all of the things you've spent years accumulating do not automatically convert into authority over a purpose-level constraint. That admission is your identity shift. It's harder than leaving because it means giving up a story you've probably been telling yourself for years. That staying long enough and working hard enough eventually buys you the power to fix what's broken. Once you've made that admission, resilience is the discipline of leaving well, of leaving intact relationships. You have documentation of what you tried, what worked, and what didn't. So the people staying behind aren't stranded. No scorched earth on the way out, because how you leave is itself a leadership act. Maybe the last one you get to perform in that seat. And empowerment shows up twice on the other side of that door. Once for the team you're leaving, give them what you hand them before you go. And once again, somewhere new, specifically because the organization is willing to bring you in, it has already run this same diagnostic on itself. They already know they have a constraint they cannot fix from the inside, because everyone currently inside their interconnections is by definition part of what's holding that constraint in place. They need someone whose authority isn't compromised by relationships in history they were never a part of. That's not failure walking out of the door. That's a correctly diagnosed system meeting a leader equipped to properly move it. Recall that episode 26 was a personal test. Mission, energy, impact, team health, gut. It asked how you're doing. And it ended in a binary about your own state, whether to prepare an exit or refocus on what you control. This, my friends, is a structural test. It asks the question where the constraint lives and whether you specifically, in this specific seat that you sit in, hold the authority to move it. A leader can pass episode 26 test completely, energized, mission clear, team is healthy and engaged, and still fail this one. Because no amount of personal wellness, no amount of mission clarity buys you authority you were never granted. If you're someone who calls yourself a leader, this test isn't something that you run just once in a crisis when things finally get bad enough to force the question. It's something you need to run continuously as a discipline. Tolerating a constraint indefinitely without ever checking whether you have authority over it is not resilience. It just feels like resilience from the inside. From the outside, it's absorbing damage and calling it grit year after year in a seat that was never built to let you fix what you correctly identified as broken. 10 weeks of onboarding taught me something very, very powerful. You cannot diagnose a system from a single seat. You have to see the whole thing, the elements, the interconnections, purpose, before you can say where the real constraint lives, and before you can say whether you're the person with the authority to move it. Because that is the work. So go find your constraint. And remember, leadership isn't about perfection. It is about progress. So take this lesson, put it into action, and continue setting the gold standard in your own life and at work. I'll see you all next time.